Sit with Lexi B.
Rochelle, how are you?
I am well. How are you? It's good to be back.
I know I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. And before we get started, and I think you've heard me tell this story, but I always want to tell it in front of you because I always want to give you your flowers and I want other new people to hear it. I remember when I joined the company that we met at, that you both worked at, and there was a situation where I got an opportunity for press, but I got it at the last minute. And somehow Black Jesus and the ancestors aligned, and I ran into you in the hallway. Because to be frank with you, if I didn't run into you, this would have never happened. I was not going to hit you up. I was not going to call you. I was going to let it go. So for folks who are listening, when you work at these big companies, when you have press, you have to get it approved by comms. And this is a last minute press thing. So I was like, there's no way I'm going to get it approved by comms because who's going to run this up the chain in the next 12 hours? And it just so happens that I run into Rochelle in the hallway, who's the comms guru at this company. And I bring it up. And I remember you looked at me and you were like, do you want this? And for about 2 minutes, I rambled and gave you every excuse to why we can't do this. And you responded and said, do you want this? And I was like, yeah, questioner. And you handled it. And the reason why that story is so impactful is I think many times we talk about how you need allies at work, but we don't talk about what that looks like. And you consistently and are always an ally for people. And I think many times people don't even realize it. And I want you to hear that from me.
Thank you.
So what's in your coffee cup?
Tea. I always joke about this question because I have coffee about once a year. And when I do, it's because I need to be up and then I'm up and then I'm like, I'm never having coffee again. I do love the flavor of it though, but if people know me, I'm from the Caribbean. And so if it's not tea, it's water. But typically it's my mint tea I grow in my garden, or actually I've been going to the farmer's market quite a bit. And there's this chocolate mint plant that tastes like heaven. And so that's been in my coffee cup lately.
So I know that you live in an urban city. You live in San Francisco. You have a garden in the middle of San Francisco. That's a thing.
It's a little herb garden that's sitting in a little atrium. We've come up since the last time we've spoken. We have a little bit more square footage. And so we're able to do the things that we like. And I think that's the blessing of sort of time passing and understanding yourself and knowing how to show up for yourself as well.
So where are your people from? You mentioned the Caribbean, but let's get specific. Where is the Rochelle clan from?
Oh gosh, mostly based in Jamaica. Right now, I emigrated to the US in sort of late 80s, early 90s with my family. So New York, raised, Jamaican bred, and I consider myself a citizen of the world. I think the best gift we can give ourselves and the people that were put on this earth to look after is that gift of perspective. And so my people are Jamaican, but I am everywhere.
But you were born in Jamaica, so you
ma'am.
immigrated to the US.
Yes, ma'am.
How old were you?
I was 8.
Do you remember that transition?
Absolutely. It was New York Airport. It was November. I get off the plane and I was put in a purple puffy coat. It might have been LaGuardia, but I think it was Newark. And I remember we get home, and I told this story yesterday, as a matter of fact. We get home to my auntie's house because that's where we had to live at the time when we first got there. And they wanted to give us pizza. So I bit into this slice of pizza, this slice of Americana, and I hated it. I was just like, it's hot and it's oily and all these things, because what people don't realize is the cheese that I grew up eating was in December when we had this sort of caked like bread called bun and cheese. And the cheese we received was tin cheese. And I remember my grandmother several years later came to the US to come visit, and we put out a cheese spread with all the cheeses we know and love. Blue cheese, fancy stinky cheese, like hard cheese, soft cheese. She takes one bite, she goes, oh, it stink and it cool. Or it's cool and it smell bad. But I love pizza now. I've had the opportunity to have many different kinds, but I'm partial to New York pizza these days as well still.
That's hilarious. I love talking to people who remember their immigration experience wherever they immigrated to, because I think so many times we especially in America, this country that's full of immigrants. We hear these stories of like, my mom came here, or my dad came here. But to have that direct experience of like, no, 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 I remember life pre this.
That's why
I'm aware of life post this. And here are the goods and bads of both those situationships.
absolutely. It shapes you in a way, I think, that's both a gift and sort of makes you feel a little bit like a fish out of water because you understand that your life was different. And as a pretty precocious kid, my parents really poured into us sort of like the value of critical thinking and education and sort of the benefit of being where we were at the time when we arrived. And so I noticed a lot. And I read a lot and I asked a lot of questions. And I was so annoying to my parents. They got me this book called 1000 Questions and Answers. But I do think that for a long time I was almost of two minds, two consciousnesses, right? Consciousnesses, or however you say it. It should be better grammar at this point. Um, because I remember what it was like to grow up at a place where everyone looked the same.
Mm.
And then to sort of then move to a place where the conversation was about our differences in such a stark way, I think shaped me tremendously. I began to sort of think about how conversations affected people. I think it's made me a better communicator because I look for our similarities and I look for our differences and I try to play to each, depending on the audience I'm trying to reach.
Since you brought it up, my question to you is how was it as a child to understand good old American racism coming from a place where the majority of people looked like you, and then going to New York? Now, the good news is that you were dropped in New York, which is a very diverse city. So it's not like there are no black people in New York. There's a whole tons of black people in New York. There's a ton of every kind of people in New York. It wasn't like you were in, Iowa. But that is still very much a difference. What was that like for you with your initial understanding of what's going on? What's going on? Yeah.
So it wasn't New York City, it was Long Island. But I think that matters because at that time there was a wave of new immigrants from the Caribbean coming into New York. A lot of them settled in Brooklyn, but some chose Long Island. So we were part of a community of immigrants from Haiti and Jamaica and the DR that sort of made it feel a little bit familiar because our parents in Trinidad, obviously, our parents had similar experiences. I think what was different, and I learned this when we went to college actually, which is actually how much of a bubble we lived in and how naive that we still were. Because some of the conversations I heard some of my friends who had grown up in the South, or some of my friends had grown up outside of sort of like these urban sprawl areas or in the suburbs close to a city where there was more diversity, they would say things like, there was this kid got beat up at school because he was being black and blah, blah, blah. We're just like, really? Right. So it felt like, and I went to undergrad in DC, right? Chocolate City. And one of my dearest friends, she just got her PhD this past summer. She went to Philly and we both went to school early. And I remember her calling me up and she said, I'm hearing all of these stories and it was just very weird, right? And it was less about racism because we sort of like had tangentially seen that and heard other people's conversations, and more about like colorism and how we were different. And she was my American Black friend, right? So even those conversations were different and those experiences were different from being a Black person from the Caribbean. And people, I think, sometimes look at us as a monolith, but I had a lot to learn from my Black American friends, right? There's a lot I didn't understand. So I was a floater for quite a bit and didn't quite understand like where I would fit. I almost felt more comfortable in sort of the space of the university. And I went to a PWI because everyone was different, right? And I went to PWI in DC where a lot of kids were from other countries. And so I felt almost more comfortable there because I didn't have to like feel like I didn't belong with my American friends. It's a weird thing to think about now as an adult. But again, I think I'm more empathetic now and I fight that much harder because I think people don't see what we saw and what we continue to see.
I think my college experience was like the exact opposite of yours because as a Black American, roots are the enslavement of Black people who were enslaved in the Southern America. I go to college, it's a PWI, and at the time my college was 13% Black. But as you said, Black is not a monolith. Mm-hmm. So I was a minority with the minority because the majority of Black folks at my school were immigrants or first generation of the diaspora all over the world, right? Mm-hmm. Whole bunch of Africans all over the motherland. we had Black Brazilians, a whole bunch of Caribbeans. And so going to college, I remember walking as a freshman into these Black spaces and thinking we all know the same thing. And I spent 4 years in undergrad basically being coached on what the diaspora is. And so leaving college, I'm no longer this Black American kid who only eats, collard greens and cornbread, and thinking that my Blackness is centered around the American South.
Yeah.
But like this worldly diasporic understanding of what Black is, and that we are not a monolith. Yeah.
I will say my Black American friends taught me to pay attention. They taught me to pay attention and to see things for what it was. And I think there's this tension where there's a part of your mind that says, gosh, you're seeing this stuff everywhere. Why am I not seeing it? And then they're like, open your eyes, boo. And you do. And you do. And it's not that it is everywhere. It is that the things that I dismissed as someone being themselves, or the things that I already had accounted for in my calculus, because I'd always been othered anyway, meant something different to them because it was their lived experience, and it was the experience of people that they knew in their lives, or their grandfathers and their grandmothers. And so I think that perspective was as much of an education, so sort of that eyes open, sort of this idea of the availability of an HBCU. It never occurred to me to apply to an HBCU. I didn't understand about sort of like the Greek system and the type of support that it gave people through their lives, right? However you feel about that. I didn't understand that, like, sometimes you needed somebody to sort of look in your eyes and understand without you saying a word. And that was super cool to me. I'd like to also think that what I brought to the table was sort of this wonder at people that felt so strongly about their place here because they built here, that it reminded me of the pride of coming from a place where everyone looked like me.
So that's it, folks. Like, get you a Black American friend.
Get you a Black American friend.
Whose ancestry is rooted in the American South, and they'll make sure to open your eyes. See, that's one thing my people will do, Rochelle. That's one thing that your Black American cousins will do, okay? They'll be like, no, girl, that was racism. That was racist.
Right. It's just fascinating even having this conversation, because I don't think we take the time to think about those, right? And I think particularly in the professions that we are in, in the industry that we're in, you see the same people from the diaspora being more successful than some of the people that are here. And that's a quiet part that people don't say out loud.
Well, since you brought it up.
And people are big mad.
Since you brought it up, why do you think that is? Because I'll be frank with you again. I leave my PWI college, remember, a minority within a minority. I enter into this billion-dollar industry that everyone's trying to get into. And then I go to First Fridays at the company that we worked at, where we met each other. And for the record, great Jamaican food from one of my favorite Jamaican restaurants. So shout out to Coconuts in Palo Alto. Their oxtails are top.
That part.
But
you just said oxtails with an S. That was very American of you. It's oxtails.
Oxtails. I'm sorry. Not for my plurals. Right. I'm from St. Louis, so I feel like Mississippi, much of my Mississippi-ness, okay? My country-ness. Oxtail. Amazing. But I was also keenly aware when I first started working in the tech industry that I would get a minority within a minority. Because the majority of Black folk that I work with, again, immigrants.
Yep.
Or first generation, as in homie may have been born in America or moved here when he was 3. But when you walk into his mama's house, it's mini Accra. And so his experience in the world is very different than mine. I remember my first company, we had a new college grad class of like 150 kids. I was the only Black woman. There was a Black man, and he was from Kenya. And I remember that I went up to him and I was, trying to give the Negro head nod, like, what are we doing? We fam. And he looked at me like I had 3 heads.
Yeah. Okay.
He was like, I don't know you. And I'm like, yeah, but do you not see what this room looks like? So we about to get to know each other. And he was very clear that we are not. So let's talk about that, because I do think we don't talk about that we can talk about the numbers of Black people in corporate industries, but nobody wants to discuss the lack of Black Americans in corporate industries.
Do you think that's changing?
The discussion of the numbers.
Both. We're talking about, I think, even, when we were talking 2 seasons ago, I don't know that this conversation would have come up so naturally. It's something that's existed for as long as we've been colleagues, right?
Yeah.
But I think there has been so much on the policy front, on the political front, that forces us to say, hey, like, we are not that different. Because this is not ambiguous to anyone. And so I think it's been a trial by fire, and the conversation is now more front and center because it has to be. I hate that that's how it happened. But I think there is value in recognizing that our fates are tied together.
I definitely agree. I also think that we also have to acknowledge what capitalism looks like even within the diaspora, right? Because let's be clear, 𝐸𝐿, you and I both know a whole lot of these people that we have worked with, that we currently work with, et cetera, who are not Black Americans, are financially well off.
Yeah.
And so we can't have a conversation with race without having a conversation about money, because it's all tied together. And that's what I learned in college, right? So when I would call my parents and say, hey, yeah, college is great, having a great time, most of the Black people are not like me. And that's, and I wasn't complaining, it was an observation. And it was my dad who was like, we're gonna have to have a conversation about money, right? And where this money is coming from. Because, for example, the college that I went to, if you were coming as an international student, you weren't eligible for financial aid. So either A, your mom, dad, auntie Goldfish wrote that check, or B, there's some like outside provider. Maybe you have a 𝐟𝐸𝐿 cousin in your family. I don't know. But it was paid for by them. And I think that continued. And I think that we don't in this country, or at least within the Black community, talk enough about when you are in the United States, where is the money for Black people whose ancestry is rooted in building this country?
How do you do that calculus? And there's, the sort of policy discussions around reparations, the policy discussions around sort of like equity, from the perspective of evening the playing field. There are policy discussions about tax credits, student loan forgiveness, all of those things. And so some of it is lip service, to be clear. And some of it, I think, is more than deserved and more than overdue. But again, I think that stems from the conversation that people are recognizing that everyone does not start from the same place. And there is something that is owed. But like, what is that number?
See, I don't know. And for the record, I always tell people, I'm not going to get in the weeds with that, because my last
calculations.
My last calculus class was AP Calc.
I am an advocate for everyone who deserves something to get something, but I wouldn't be eligible for it, right?
And for the record, I am pro reparations. I need my 40 acres and a mule, or as my grandfather said, at this rate, we need 100 acres and a Bentley. And I'm like, you right. Put some tax on that, sir. I think it's the debate. But then at the same time, I would argue, people say we can't figure it out because who gets it? But yet Japanese, they figured out how to give reparations and money to the Japanese in internment camps. People don't want to talk about it, but Jewish people get reparations from the Holocaust. So I think my argument to that is, I don't have an answer for you, but somehow everybody else figured it out.
Is that the answer? Is it throwing money at the problem? Is it policy change? Is it something that we have to sort of take ownership of? And I hate that, right? Because it's us doing the work. I don't know that money absent sort of systemic changes are going to do anything.
I do not think that if the government wrote me and my family a check today, that would change the racism that I receive.
Correct.
And just like I have a rule, I do not leave liquor on the table. I will not leave that check on the table. And I think that money is part of it. Because my people, along with a whole bunch of other people, millions and millions of people, built this country for free. And so I really feel like money is not the answer, but I want my check.
Money.
I'm talking about redlining in America, when I'm talking about housing, when I'm talking about generational wealth, right? I took out student loans for me to go to college, and so did a lot of people. So I'm not unique in that experience. I am aware that there were a ton of people I went to college with that, because of the generational wealth of their grandfathers and their uncles and their aunts and their great-great-grandma so-and-so who married whoever, who had like a cash flow of gold in her basement when she died, that they didn't have to take out student loans. So using that example, I took out student loans. I'm still paying them off. I am now a mother. So every month that I pay off my student loan, that takes money out of my kid's mouth. Now, I'm very blessed that I can afford to do that, and she's not on the street because of my student loan. I'm not trying to make that analysis, but I am saying that, like, yeah, money is part of it. And more importantly, there's other groups of people in the history of Western society that, for whatever reason, our government, without question, has been like, we have to write a check.
Can we pivot a second to sort of this idea of motherhood and the cost of that? I think about maternal health outcomes, particularly for women who look like us, and for women who don't, right? It's no respecter of class. It's no respecter of race. It's actually worse for us, but I think that is the one issue, or one of the issues, that I think, because sort of these terrible maternal outcomes impact everyone that can birth babies, or even people that have difficulty doing so. I think that's a good place to start when we're talking about where we want to invest some of those dollars, even if you're not cutting me specifically a check. It's something that's become really important to me. And I think, we opened up in the prelude to this call talking about how it feels to be a new mom. And you just also talk about how it feels to have to sort of find this balance between, taking food out of your kid's mouth, hypothetically, for people that are in your situation or not, and investing in their future. And I think that's something super duper important. And so when I think about what that check looks like, I wonder if it's like, yeah, it'd be cool if it came to me. Well, it'd be even freaking cooler if it went to the places where people like me go to seek treatment. I don't know. I think about life a lot lately because we are getting older, and our parents are getting older. And those same safety nets that existed for others who had access to those jobs, or had access to the ability to buy those homes where they now have equity in that they can use in case they have an emergency, they don't have that. And so again, it's the systems versus the individual sort of compensation that I think is probably going to be a source for debate.
It doesn't matter if you can buy a house or not if you're not alive, right?
Right.
We're like, health is wealth is something that I think we joke around and we just flippantly say that over and over again. But like, legit, family, it does not matter what you can do with your operation check if you were not alive. And as a person who is a Black woman, I remember my experience becoming pregnant and having to navigate the American medical system was the hardest thing for me medically. And I do want to honor that my dad is a doctor. So growing up, the stories that I hear about non-white children having to go through in the healthcare system and their parents, I never had those stories. I never had that experience because my dad was a doctor. So I literally had in-house advocacy.
Okay, Cosby Show.
Right? Like, I remember every pediatric appointment, anything happening, those doctors knew my dad. And so they weren't playing, right? Me as pregnant was the first time in my entire life that I had to navigate the medical system without my dad. And y'all, the craziest things, I remember being 5 weeks pregnant in the ER because I was sick. and the doctor trying to give me opioids. And after explaining to this ER doctor multiple times that I'm very early in this pregnancy, her response was, it's fine. It's fine. There are studies that show that this is going to be okay. Right. And there were just crazy things in my first trimester. And then what happened is that there's a Black maternal clinic in San Francisco. If you know, yes, that is part of UCSF. And shout out to UCSF.
UCSF and their skin of color clinic, their dermatology clinic, also
Yes,
thought it.
Yes.
Yeah, they got
Turns out the head of UCSF pediatrics and OBGYN is a Black woman born and raised in Oakland. Okay.
I love that.
So I slithered my way into that clinic, and the rest of my pregnancy from a medical perspective of advocacy was fantastic. I had the best of care. But I remember being in my first trimester, having to navigate this. And I really thought that my baby and or I were going to die. I really thought the medical system was actively trying to kill my baby. And if my baby survived this, it was just like the luck of the draw.
Yeah. And what's crazy is our story is, that story is not unique. And we're in a place where the sort of the university system is great, where there are clinics dedicated to us, where we can go and say, okay, I'm going to choose a different type of care for myself. And it's still not right. The opioid thing was also interesting that you mentioned. I used to have this theory during when the opioid epidemic came to a head, that one of the reasons why you saw a difference in the numbers with Black patients is because they either thought we were trying to get the drugs, or they think that we are impervious to pain. And so they're like, we're not going to give it to you. And so it's a one time where I'm like, that systemic issue worked in our favor, right? They're like, we're not going to give it to you. And so, it's one of those things where like, it's kind of messed up, but like bias impacts us in ways that are so unexpected. And that unintended consequence probably saved a lot of lives. But to be clear, I feel pain. I'm a punk. I am a punk. Pain hurts.
I'd like to put on the record that Rochelle feels
pain. I too feel.
I do feel pain. As a dark-skinned Black woman in this country, I too feel pain.
I feel pain.
I would also like to add that I feel pain as well. I thought that I had a high pain tolerance, and then I started labor, and I was like, nah, fam, y'all better drug me, knock me out. I do not. And I think I was like half a centimeter dilated. And they were like, you just started. And I was like, and I'm ending. I fell out. The number of times that I thought about it. Yeah.
That's great. They're not perfect.
The number of times that I thought about like my ancestors like naturally birthing children stations, I was like, that is just ridiculous. Nope. Inappropriate behavior.
Just knock me out. And you know what? I'm okay with not being a martyr. There are no points for choosing the difficult option. Who's gonna thank me for that? Not the baby. She doesn't know.
And honestly, girl, from what I've learned from motherhood, they don't really care either. So,
and they keep taking, and it's a different kind of pain.
Earth is motherhood. That's a whole separate topic, but Earth is ghetto and so is motherhood. These kids have no couth. They have no couth
at all.
At all. So you have worked at some of the most, well, what would some consider the most amazing companies in the world.
Yeah.
And kind of still on this theme that we unexpectedly stumbled upon, but I think is fabulous. What are you doing in your daily work to make these places better within the system that frankly doesn't want us to survive?
I am taking lessons, and I have always done that in my career, from the people that have shown up for me really well, even when they didn't know me. When I started working at the company where we met, there was a woman who's actually doing awesome. She actually left a few years after I came in, and she would invite every Black person when they started out to lunch on our team. And it was like the coolest thing, right? Like, no one told her to do it, right? It wasn't her job, and we'd all go to lunch. She was black. We'd all go to lunch, and I think about that every day. When I go into new companies, and when I was leaving that company, I'd just gotten a promotion, and I knew what it meant to be a director at that company on that team, because I knew what it meant elsewhere, because there weren't very many like me, and the woman, the last black female director, wasn't in the U.S. She was outside of the U.S. And she's a badass. I'll say her name in room for she wasn't in a ballet. She was always just sort of like this really brilliant person that I just watched.
Can we just have a moment for a ballet? And we will, and you know what? I will make sure to WhatsApp her this and let her know to listen to this. But yeah, a ballet for president. Because I remember when I joined the company, it was you that I met, and you were like, we need to talk. And I don't know how I met a ballet, but my first trip to London, I know that I already connected with her. And this woman, y'all, this woman was on vacation when I was at work when I went to London, because she lives in London. And she came back from her vacation and met me for tea outside of the work office before I got on a plane.
Yeah.
And also, she looks not a day older than 18.
She's carried some of the largest problems and issues for that company on her back.
Yes. With 3 children and a dog at home. Okay, don't play her, right? So,
while being an advocate and a philanthropist and taking a time, I remember, I think she was leaving, and I shot her and I said, you may not remember, I was having a difficult time thinking about leaving the company, and I ended up just switching teams. And I shot her a note and I said, hey, did this happen to you? And relaying my experience. And she said, yeah, girl. Right. And she helped me figure out how to navigate. And she's one of the reasons why I stayed. And I said, you don't remember me? She's like, I remember you. And in fact, I saw her about a month and a half ago. I was in for another company that I was working for. I was just there for a business meeting, and she was just walking down the street in Brooklyn. I'm just like, is this an apparition? She just shows up when you need her. I was like, okay. So give people their flowers.
We need more people like that, because one thing about her and you, because you're very similar to her, is that it's the realness for it. It's this is how you do this. And it's also the conversations of like, what do you want? Okay, so you want this. This is how you go about this. And here's what I can do to help you get that.
Yeah. I think the one thing that I think has helped me the most with that is I do it quietly, and here's why. It is so difficult for people to ask for help, right? That takes, particularly for ambitious people who look like us, who know we are in these spaces where people don't think we belong, or we're trying to maintain and bring people up next to us, not behind, I always say next to, or to look after other people. I think one of the most difficult things is to ask for help. So I try to signal in ways both sort of obvious and subtle that I am available. And that help could be an introduction, it could be a conversation, or it could just be commiseration, right? One of the things that I tell people when I talk about showing up for them, a lot of people will say, I'm so sorry, or if someone's going through a tragedy, or they'll say, I'm going to do this for you, or I'm going to make this call. My new question is, how can I show up best for you? If they don't have an answer, you can work toward that answer together. You can help them figure out the type of help they need. If they do have the answer, then you know exactly what to do to help. And so that's been what I've been doing lately. Like, how can I best show up for you?
Why do you think that it's difficult for people to ask for help? Because I agree with you. And to be frank with you, I am a anti-asking for help survivor.
Yeah.
Okay. I am in Help Anonymous, and I am actively trying to be better, because what I'm realizing as I get older is that I can't live on an island alone. I can't do the things that I want to do in a vacuum. And then now, especially with these kids, okay, I sure as hell can't do it. And so I've become a lot better at asking for help. But in my 20s, that was a really hard thing to do. So why do you think it's so hard for us to do that?
Because we're raised and we're conditioned to be achievers, and sort of what comes with that sometimes is a fear of failure. And sometimes people equate sort of, I don't get this, or I'm not performing in a way that is probably someone else's expectation. I'm not meeting someone else's bar. That it is signaling that I am not good enough or I don't belong here. I think as we get older, one of the things that I recognize most, people love getting asked to help. They love that. I have an intern. I give all my interns my phone number. And I think what's interesting is the ones who call, I know are going to do really, really, really well. And it's different from sort of like if there's a manager I look after who looks after my internship program. As a leader of a team or the leader of a department, I give those interns my number, even if I've never interacted with them. And I say, call me. And I mean it. And here's why. When you pour into someone, it actually feels good. I think for powerful people, whether those people are mentors or not, who look like us or don't look like us, when you ask them for help, that makes them feel useful or it's valuable to them in a way that feeds the ego. And that in turn can pay dividends. I'm a mercenary about it. Like, I will ask anybody for help because I know that it benefits both them and me.
So I think that's the story. Y'all need to start asking for some help.
All the help.
All the help. All the help. Because I think you're right. You never know what people can provide. There have been times where I've asked for help from people and they will say, I cannot do that, but my wife can. Let me text her. It is crazy, my experience asking for help in my professional and personal life and the help that I received. And my favorite are the ones where I ask for this one thing and the person looks at me and they're like, do you really want that? Or maybe you want this. And I'm like, oh.
Right? How can I show up for you? Right? What can I do? Because now you're both arriving at like, what is the optimal thing? They might see things you don't see. I think the interesting part about that too is, that ask is an act of bravery on both parts because now they're taking responsibility. So when you both have sort of skin in the game, can you imagine how far? Because now they're invested, right? Because they've said, now my fate is tied to yours.
Yes. Yes. So I think, like, in conclusion, reparations for all. Write me my check. Run me my money. Okay. Ask for help.
Yeah.
And a belly for president.
And a belly for president, all of it. Wants to be.
Yes, because knowing her, I'm thinking, I'm like, would she even go for that? I don't know. Because I can just see her be like, you're gonna drink my water and mind my business. Y'all can't pull me enough. I can see her saying that.
And that's why she looks the way she does.
Girl, not a day over 20. Don't play her. Don't play her.
Okay.
So in conclusion, let's reintroduce yourself. Who are you?
My name is Rochelle Nathiri, and I'm the luckiest girl in the world.
Why is that? Why are you the luckiest girl in the world?
Because if I look back and I look forward to sort of like all the conversations I've had, all the people I've met, all the people I've had the opportunity to look after, and all the people who have looked after me, there's obviously the inherent blessing of coming from a praying house. But it's also like, sometimes you got to be there at the right time, and that is luck. When you are placed in a place and it turns into magic, I think sometimes you forget about that, right? So whenever anyone asks me, I say I'm the luckiest girl in the world. In my friendships, in terms of my family, and again, in terms of the conversation and things that I've learned for people, and even the lessons, like asking for that help.
Or like you said, you come from a praying family. I come from that praying family as well. The praying folks probably say blessed and highly favored.
All of that.
Yeah.
I will take all of those little catalysts, all of sort of like the little weights in my favor. I think people tend to try to be humble about the help they've received. Nope. I've had help. I believe in nepotism.
Amen.
Help me. Please. Help me.
So on that note, thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much for being a person that I know I can always ask for help and you always show up.
I absolutely adore you. I can't wait to see the rest of the episodes.